Hello and welcome to The Case For, a Baseball Hall of Fame podcast. I'm your host, attorney and baseball fan extraordinaire, Russell Christian. Today's episode is going to be very short. My last episode was the longest I've ever done, almost 2 hours long. So if you listened to that whole episode, thank you so much for listening. I will reward your patience with a lightning round episode where I briefly recap yesterday's vote. And we heard who was elected into the Hall of Fame on the Contemporary Baseball Era Committee ballot. Of course, if you have been living in a cave for the past 24 hours, you will learn here on this podcast. It was Jeff Kent. And congratulations to Jeff Kent. I said on my last episode, I thought he was going to get in the Hall of Fame someday. I think he is a Hall of Famer. He is a Hall of Famer. And he's a very deserving player who had a very good career. He's the all-time leader in home runs at second base and RBI at second base. We'll get into that in a little bit. And it's tough because, especially on these smaller ballots where usually only one, maybe two guys get in, you have a lot of deserving candidates. I mean, this ballot was stacked. That's why I spent almost 2 hours going through it. So somebody's going home empty-handed and somebody's going home in the Hall of Fame. So it's tough because just like a good World Series, you know, one team's got to win and one team's got to lose. And if you're the losing team, it stinks. Somebody mentioned on Twitter X yesterday that they felt gutted that Dale Murphy didn't get in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, I responded, I agree. It's a gut punch. I really was thinking it was his year. I've been hyping up the year of Dale Murphy on Twitter X all year. I really thought that he was going to get in this year. And I think not just me, but the entire baseball fandom, or at least baseball Twitter, was thinking, yeah, it was going to be Murph and Mattingly. That'd be a great way to recognize players beyond the stats, look at players that were faces of the game, played the game with integrity, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into all that stuff in a little bit, but I think everyone was shocked, including Jeff Kent. I think Jeff Kent was a little shocked that he got in, and I'll give him credit immediately, or almost immediately in his statement when they were interviewing him, mentioned Murph, mentioned Mattingly. I think he was thinking they would get in, and he wanted them to get in, so I appreciate that. And, you know, Dale Murphy Class Act almost immediately tweeted out, congratulations to Jeff Kent. If you know Dale Murphy, that's not surprising. He's a classy guy. I'm sure he was upset just like we all are, but you know, it is what it is, and there's no reason to give up hope. There is hope if you're a Dale Murphy or Don Mattingly fan or a Carlos Delgado fan. We'll get into that. Just cutting right in. Again, we'll keep this short. Briefly, the way the Contemporary Baseball Era Committee ballot works, there's 16 voting members. I broke them all down in my last episode. A player needs 12 votes to get inducted. Now, each of those 16 members can vote up to 3 times. They don't have to vote 3 times. They can actually vote 0 times. I really hope that didn't happen. They can vote for up to 3 players. And any player with 12 or more votes gets inducted. And any player with 5 or more votes is eligible to return on the next ballot for this era committee, which is going to be in 2028. So if you look at the vote totals, Kent got 14, which 2 more than he needed, and he got in the Hall of Fame. Delgado was the second highest vote getter, got 9, so he'll return on that 2028 ballot. And then Murph and Mattingly both got 6 votes, so they'll return on that 2028 ballot as well. Now, if a player got 5 or less votes, then they are not eligible to be on this ballot again until 2031. So Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Gary Sheffield, Fernando Valenzuela are not going to be eligible for the next iteration of this ballot in 2028, but they can be on it in 2031. And if they don't get the necessary votes then they will never be able to get in the Hall of Fame, at least under the current rules. So, long story short, the survivors, if you will, that will make it onto the next Contemporary Era ballot are Delgado, Murph, and Mattingly. Now, with the removal of the players I just mentioned, if we look back, the last time this committee met prior to this year was 2022. That's when they elected Fred McGriff. Interestingly, Mattingly received 8 votes while Murph got 6 votes. So Murph stayed the same. Mattingly actually dropped 2 votes. Now it's different, makeup of who's on the committee, of course. Curt Schilling was on that ballot, but he wasn't on this year's ballot, and Curt received 7 votes in that last ballot. So it's possible, it's too early to predict, but it's possible that the 2028 Contemporary Era ballot might look something like this. Carlos Delgado, Dale Murphy, Don Mattingly, and Curt Schilling, plus some notable absences from the past 2 Contemporary Era ballots. Lou Whitaker, Dwight Evans, Willie Randolph, Brett Saberhagen, Keith Hernandez. I'm just throwing names out. Those are some guesses. Maybe we see some other guys here. One of the things I thought was interesting, I'm just going to do a lightning round here. I'm curious how much analytics factored into the voting. If you look at the WAR, or wins above replacement, Jeff Kent had the highest B-WAR of the non-PED associated players. Obviously, I mentioned on my podcast episode last time, Barry Bonds, the all-time leader in B-WAR. I think that, we'll get into this in a second, the PED guys were handled differently, but amongst the non-PED players, Jeff Kent had the highest B-WAR for position players, 55.4. I'm curious if they just went off that ranking. I wonder if it was that combined with the career home run and RBI totals for second baseman. He's first overall in those two categories. I'm wondering if that's what factored into it. But if you look at if that's the case, Dale Murphy had the second most B-WAR amongst position players that were not associated with PEDs. That's 46.5, just a few points above Carlos Delgado, who has almost 100 more home runs. Delgado has 44.4 WAR, and Mattingly has 42.4 WAR. One of the things I thought was interesting, now it's probably an exercise in futility because the people that made up this ballot voted differently, voted in a room as opposed to baseball writers who just send in their ballots. But I'm wondering if a second baseman who had a high career WAR bodes well for Chase Utley this go-round. We'll talk about that in my Baseball Writers Association of America ballot breakdown episode. Utley has a 64.6 WAR. If you're an Utley fan, maybe the induction of Jeff Kent into the Hall of Fame bodes well for your favorite player, Chase Utley. We'll get into that in another episode. But I want to break down just a few of my thoughts here on this ballot. First, with regard to Jeff Kent being the all-time leader in home runs and in RBI for second baseman, myself and some of the other baseball nerds on baseball Twitter pointed out, not trying to pick on anybody, everybody makes mistakes, but I thought it was interesting. The San Francisco Giants posted a graphic congratulating Jeff Kent on getting into the Hall of Fame. And why wouldn't they? Jeff Kent had the best years of his career as a Giant, won the MVP as a Giant, and it would be pretty crazy if he didn't go into the Hall of Fame as a Giant. So yes, I would imagine the Giants would congratulate him. It would be strange if they didn't. In their graphic, they mentioned he has the most ever home run and home run and RBI by a second baseman. What I thought was interesting is that they included his total career numbers, 377 home runs and 1,518 RBI, and they listed underneath those most ever by second baseman. Now, again, I'm splitting hairs here, but if you go on Baseball Reference, there's a way that you can find home runs, RBI, all the stats based on the position, because a player like Jeff Kent, he was a second baseman, but he didn't play every game of his career at second base. He had a few other games where he played other positions, and that's not uncommon. Most players, even though they're known for playing one position, sometimes guys get hurt, or maybe they're hurt for whatever, 1,000 different reasons. They may play a different position. Sometimes it's the beginning of their career, and the team's still trying to find where to put them, or the end of their career, and they're moving them around because they aren't as athletic as they were in the past. But for whatever reason, it's rare that a player will literally play every single game of their career at the exact same position. So for that reason, you can actually look up the stats by position. So Jeff Kent's home runs by a second baseman, he actually 377 includes all positions. I went on a long thread. I won't really get into it, but if you take away the home runs and the RBI that were at other positions, he's still the all-time leader in home run and in RBI for second baseman. The controversy, let's get right to this, is this infographic says that his 855 OPS is the highest ever by a second baseman, and that's not true. That's just simply not true. And again, we all make mistakes. I'm not trying to pick on someone when they're down, but here's the thing. I went on a long thread on my Twitter X account, and that's not true whether or not you take into account his OPS played at second base or his total overall career OPS. There are second basemen who, for their career at all positions, had higher OPS, and there are two second basemen, Rogers Hornsby and Charles Gehringer, who, playing at second base, had higher career OPSs than Jeff Kent. So, again, maybe a bit of a mistake. By the way, here, I'm going to throw these totals at you. Based upon games played at second base, and I used 1,000-game minimum to weed out people, the Moonlight Grams that had one game, in 3 hits or something. 1,000-game minimum. Jeff Kent at second base is third all-time in OPS with his 866. Those are games he just played second base. He has an 866 OPS. And Rogers Hornsby has the all-time OPS for games played at second base, 1.062. And Charlie Gehringer has a second highest OPS for games played at second base with 889. So the graphic is incorrect whether or not you take into account Jeff Kent's OPS overall for all positions for his entire career or played at second base. Are we grasping at straws? Maybe. It just seemed a little disingenuous or maybe a little sloppy for a professional team to put out an infographic with a blatantly false statistic. And the reason why I'm mentioning all of this is because I wasn't in the smoke-filled room, and I'm curious what stats were presented to the players, executives, and the journalists and historians who were voting. And that gets me to sort of my soapbox a little bit here. I'd like to see some transparency in this voting process in these era committee ballots. I've seen some interviews over the year. I feel like there's an unspoken rule that the players, executives, journalists, the people that comprise the ballot just don't go out and talk about what happened. If I'm wrong, let me know. I'd love to see some interviews, but I have seen one or two interviews where they've essentially said they just pick a name and people sort of say yay or nay. And I get the impression, because it's at the winter meeting, because it's on a weekend, because these people are all, a lot of them retired or they're busy or they're important. And I question how much time and effort they put into this. I know they love baseball. They played baseball. Most of those guys are Hall of Famers. But is this sort of like hey, let's wrap this up because we've got a dinner appointment and we get a tea time? And, I don't know how long they spend. Is it an hour? They spent 30 minutes. They spent 5 hours. I don't know if they exhaustively go through every player's stats. I don't know. I'd like to have a little bit of transparency in the process. I'd love to get an idea of how the people vote. And, there's pros and cons to that. Some people will say, well, a lot of journalists don't like to put their Hall of Fame votes and ballots on Twitter X. Over the years, a lot of them do. And almost all the ones who do, you put that on Twitter X, you're going to get trolls, you're going to get haters, because here's the thing. I see those ballots from journalists, and I don't think I've ever seen a ballot that I completely agree with, because we all have different opinions, and that's fine. My opinion on my last episode was I wanted to see Mattingly, Murphy, and Valenzuela get into the Hall of Fame. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, no, that's crazy. Okay, well, that's just my opinion. You're allowed your opinion. I'd just like to see some transparency in the process. That's all I'm saying. Because I'm curious if the narrative in the room was that of the Hall of Stats versus the Hall of Fame. Because I mentioned the career war. I'm curious if they were going based upon the career war, and I'm curious how much that is going to impact future ballots, the analytics of things. I'm curious if the conversation about faces of 80s baseball was even held in the room. I'm big on the fame factor. Perhaps even to a fault, I'm big on the fame factor. If you listen to my last episode, I tried to wax as poetic as possible about why Dale Murphy belongs in the Hall of Fame. I still do, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Our work is not done. I might take that fame factor into account more than others. I've said on this podcast and on my Twitter X, I'm a big fan of the Hall of Fame cases for Roger Maris and for Tommy John. And a lot of people that just look at the stats might say you're crazy. I'll admit, Roger Maris doesn't really have the stats. I could make a case for him. He's got some rings. He has 2 MVPs, and he has the 61 home run season, without which the game of baseball and the story of baseball, can't be told. So I'm big on that stuff because maybe it's the poet in me. It's the artist in me. I like to focus on that fame factor. And I'm curious if the people in the room do. I'm curious because you have a lot of executives, and I'm wondering if they're looking more from like a dollar and cents perspective, and they're looking more at the analytics. I don't know. I'd love to hear. If anyone out there is a fan of this podcast and you're listening, if you're one of the people that was voting, I'd love to have you on the podcast. I'd love to get a peek into the room, and we can talk off the record too if there's things you can't talk about or for whatever. I'm an attorney. I get all that. We can have a conversation and say, hey, this is, off limits. That's fine. I'd just love to get a bit of a peek in to try to get an idea, because honestly, if I knew, okay, this is what the voters are looking for in these small rooms, I'm going to tweak my episodes. I'm going to do more episodes about Dale Murphy to say, fine, you want to focus on the analytics? You want to focus on the hardware? Let me take a deep dive into that category, because I'm not going to stop advocating for Dale Murphy to get into the Hall of Fame. I'm just not going to. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So a little bit of a soapbox issue there. I would like to see a little bit of transparency in the voting process. One of the things that I think we could discover if there was a little bit more transparency in the voting process is how the PED issue played out. I don't think we need to be a fly on the wall to know, hey, Bonds, Clemens, Sheffield didn't get in on the baseball writers ballot, and now they didn't get in on this era ballot. So it seems like the Hall of Fame voters on the era committee ballots are taking a hardline stance against PEDs. I was hoping, as a lot of people did, and I'm going to echo what I've said and what many people have said for decades, if you're going to, use the character clause to keep people out, I think you should use it also affirmatively to get people in. I can't think of a better character and ambassador for the game than Dale Murphy. And there's just a lot to be said there we'll get into in a little bit. I'll just recap briefly here in terms of some housekeeping matters before I finish with my final thoughts. Next year's era committee ballot is the Contemporary Baseball Era Managers Executive Umpires ballot. I love this one. I talked about this in my 4th episode. That was the last time this era committee met, and they elected Jim Leland. I was thinking they'd elect Lou Piniella, Cito Gaston, or Joe West. I know a lot of players, a lot of fans have some opinions on Joe West. I made the case for Joe West. I think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. We'll get into another episode. We've got plenty of time to do that, but it's kind of fun because baseball managers, executives, umpires, they don't get a lot of shots to get in the Hall of Fame. So it's like, this is it, and I really hope Joe West gets in. You might disagree with me, but I'm going to finish with this. I'm just going this is all off the cuff. Just wanted to do this real quick. I didn't really write out a big script as I do often. Sometimes I've got the stats in front of me. I'm just kind of speaking from the heart here that this is what I wanted to say. The thing with Dale Murphy, I tried to wax poetic about him yesterday. Dale Murphy, this whole process for years, going back to 1999, as I mentioned, the year first, after I graduated from high school, I have been eagerly watching the news every year that he was on the baseball writers ballot, hoping he would get in the Hall of Fame. When the era committees came around, it was the same enthusiasm, the same excitement. The Baseball Project, it's a band made up of many people, including Mike Mills and Peter Buck from REM. They have a song called Do the Veterans Committee when they wrote about getting Dale Murphy into the Hall of Fame. I posted a video of me covering that song on my acoustic guitar, just playing it real quick. There's a lot of fans. And this year particularly, you saw Jason Aldean, Killer Mike. You saw all these different fans come and celebrities coming out of the woodwork. Jason Isbell in past years, he's a big Dale Murphy fan. You see all these people really stumping for Dale Murphy's case, which is why a lot of us thought he was getting in. He really had a groundswell of support. And again, another reason I want to sort of get a peek into that smoke-filled room, so to speak, is I'm curious how much that factors into their decision, or if it's just the stats and the hardware. Because I would like to think that the fan-driven causes to get a player in the Hall of Fame matter, and they help, because it makes me think that there's some meaning to what I'm doing and what other people are doing. It's funny, my wife and I have been watching Stranger Things over the past few weeks, trying to get ready for the new season that just dropped. And if you watch Stranger Things or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, I'm going to nerd out on you a little bit here. You see this ragtag group of people fighting against the big oppressive, evil empire, or what's his name, Vecna, and the evil in the Upside Down. And there's no evil here in baseball, but it's fun because I feel like this Dale Murphy Hall of Fame case, it's like this ragtag group of people that know that it's, a bit of a long shot, but we're passionate about it. And, at the risk of making the real Hall of Fame is the friends we made along the way kind of cliche joke, it's really cool and great to have this community of people that are working together for this common goal of getting this great guy, this great player, Don Mattingly too, a lot of fans, but Dale Murphy into the Hall of Fame. And I'm looking forward to continuing this passion project for myself and for others over the next few years. I'm not going to stop advocating for Dale Murphy. In fact, I'll probably do some more episodes breaking down some of his advanced stats, careers, hardware, things like that. So that's been a lot of fun. And if anything, I mentioned on my last episode how Dale Murphy made me fall in love with the game of baseball. And, when I want to know if the people in the room were using the advanced statistics, because as I said in my last episode, how do you quantify a player that made you fall in love with the game of baseball? It's impossible. And Dale Murphy did that for me. And, I thanked Dale Murphy on that episode for teaching me, to love the game of baseball a little bit more than I already did, for making me feel proud to be a Braves fan, even during the years when they weren't very good, and for, allowing me to spend some quality time with my family, with my parents who are no longer with me, at the ballpark, having these shared memories of cheering on our guy, the two-time MVP. I'm so thankful to Dale Murphy for all those experiences. And, whether or not he's in the Hall of Fame or not, you can't take those experiences away. And I'm always going to be thankful to Dale Murphy. And I just, yesterday, it was great. I sat down, my wife and I took a break. She knows how much I'm passionate about this. We spent some quality time watching the TV. We grilled out some hot dogs and burgers, like baseball food, getting ready to watch the announcement. My daughter's texting and calling me. I got friends from home, on these text threads. And I'm like, you know what? Even though he didn't get in, it's just baseball brings together generations. Baseball brings together families. Baseball brings together friends. And the fact that here I am on text threads and phone calls with my brother and my daughter and my friends, and sitting there watching with my wife, and and thinking about my parents. I'm like, baseball's already won, as has been said oftentimes. I think in the situation I'm thinking of is the World Baseball Classic when Ohtani struck out Trout. I think it was John Smoltz said baseball has already won. Baseball's already won in that scenario yesterday. Baseball won for me in the memories that Dale Murphy created for me, the connections with my family, with my daughter, my brother, my friends, all over Dale Murphy. And those connections are going to continue to grow and get deeper over the next few years as we fight for him to get in 2028, hopefully. All that being said, yes, it was difficult. I was really hoping Dale Murphy would get in. And I saw someone share this online, and I'll share it here. It's a quote from Bart Giamonte, very famous quote. You've probably heard it. I'll just read it here. Baseball breaks your heart. It is designed to break your heart. The game begins in the spring when everything else begins again, and it blossoms in the summer, filling the afternoons and evenings, and then as soon as the chill rains come, it stops and leaves you to face the fall all alone. You count on it. Rely on it to buffer the passage of time, to keep the memory of sunshine and high skies alive, and then, just when the days are all twilight, when you need it most, it stops. Baseball. Baseball broke my heart a little bit yesterday. I'm not going to lie, but I'm not going to give up hope, and I don't want to have that feeling to come across as any sort of negativity towards Jeff Kent. It's I was saying online yesterday, I kind of feel bad for him because now he knows he's the guy that all the Don Mattingly and Dale Murphy fans are like, hey, you got in and my guy didn't. So I don't want that negativity to cross over to Jeff Kent. If you're a fan of Jeff Kent, if you're a fan of the Giants, go crazy, have a party. When your guy gets in the Hall of Fame, it's fun. I was hoping to go to Cooperstown. I had a reservation booked. My wife and I canceled the reservation. I was hoping that Dale Murphy would get in the Hall of Fame. He won't, but one of these years when he gets in the Hall of Fame, I'm going to go up to Cooperstown, and I can't wait to do that. So hopefully that'll happen in 2028. We'll see. I'm going to be breaking down next year's Contemporary Baseball Era Committee ballot a little bit later this year. And, of course, my next episode is going to be breaking down the Baseball Writers Association of America ballot, and that'll be a little bit longer, probably not as long as my last one. I put a lot of emotion into the Dale Murphy episode. I might do a future episode about Dale Murphy, round 2, because I've already done one as my first episode, of course. So that's my thoughts. I just want to say I do agree. I know it's kind of controversial that the steroid guys didn't get in. I'm a little bit strict when it comes to PEDs and the Hall of Fame. It's nothing against those guys personally. I follow Barry Bonds on Instagram. He seems like a nice guy. I'm sure he'd be a fun guy to hang out with. I have some pretty, specific views about PEDs in the Hall of Fame, and I have a very specific view about how I think Dale Murphy should be in the Hall of Fame, and I'm hoping Dale Murphy gets in 2028. Until then, remember, when life gets you down, stop what you're doing and watch a baseball game.